welcome to District 150 by the Quorum. I'm Pranamya. I am extremely thrilled to be welcoming these lovely ladies behind me. So, welcome to Conscious Effort India, a leading platform on conscious design. Conscious Effort India is a Sahara initiative on a mission to educate, engage, and empower people about sustainability in the fashion and lifestyle industry. Completing 9 years this year, the brand stands proud as one of the country's largest and most well-respected forums, which has hosted meaningful dialogues with some of the most celebrated trailblazers in India and globally. The conversation today brings together two of the most compelling creative voices shaping modern Indian couture. Archana Rao and Aisha Rao have redefined what it means to design from India today, taking centuries-old crafts and translating it to a new and contemporary language, one that is spirited, culturally rooted, and resonant for the modern Indian bride. We would like to welcome fashion designer, costume designer, and national award winner Archana Rao. Archana is a Hyderabad-based designer who blends art, nostalgia, and modern femininity with effortless grace. A NIFT graduate with further training in Parsons, New York, her global education shaped the delicately structured romantic aesthetic her label is now known for. After debuting at Lakme Fashion Week Gen Next platform, Archana won the Vogue India Fashion Fund, quickly carving a niche for her softly poetic designs. Beyond the runway, she has brought her signature vintage sustainability to cinema, earning a national award for Mahanati and designing for landmark projects such as Kalki 2898 AD. A true modern romantic, Archana creates clothes that feel timeless, tender, and artfully crafted. Leading in to introduce Aisha Rao, she's an NUJS alumna who later trained at IED and Parsons. Aisha Rao has crafted one of the most distinctive voices in contemporary Indian couture. Her design language, wrist with applique, embroidery, print, and exuberant color, blends whimsical storytelling with meticulous technique. Known for redefining bridal and occasion wear with her vivid, layered aesthetic, Aisha brings craft to life through pieces that feel expressive, textural, and joyfully modern. Today, she stands as one of India's most compelling couture designers with a signature that's instantly recognizable and endlessly celebratory. Thank you for being here. Lastly, a lady that needs no introduction, but one that I will provide nonetheless, I'd like to introduce Sachi. Sachi is an Indian entrepreneur, sustainability advocate, and author of My Classic Closet. As the founder and CEO of Sahara, she leads one of India's pioneering sustainability-driven e-commerce companies. Her initiative, Conscious Effort India, has become a leading forum shaping conversations around responsible fashion and lifestyle. A recognized voice in the industry, Sachi has advised some of India's most influential companies, including Mahindra and Mahindra, on future materials and circularity. Thank you so much for being here, ladies.
Thank you, everyone, and a very warm welcome, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Aisha and Archana, for graciously accepting being here today and sharing your views with us. When I was hearing the introductions, I realized how distinct both of your journeys have been. But there is one common thread that I could identify, and that is both your belief in the power of Indian craftsmanship. And that's where I would like to begin from. Aisha, I want to start with you first. You actually studied law and then made a complete turn into couture. What brought about this change, and why did you think couture was more important or a better sort of industry to be in instead of law?
Firstly, thank you for having me today, Sachi. And yeah, I come from a family of lawyers. I was deeply passionate about fashion from a very young age, from as long as I can remember. But I think I wanted to do it in a meaningful way. I didn't want to add to the noise and the waste that the industry was known for. I also was, when you say sustainability advocate, I was one of the first, I was in the batch in the ICSE board that first got introduced to the environmental education in 7th standard. And so was really passionate about the environment, made a lot of tweaks and changes to my lifestyle to do that. And I wanted to be in meaningful fashion, which didn't exist at that time. So law was the more practical choice for me. So I wrote CLAT, got into NUJS, and I have no regrets. I loved every bit of that 5-year journey. But the heart wants what the heart wants, right? So the need to be in a creative space still was very much present. So I enrolled at IED, a Milan-based school in Barcelona, to explore design as a whole. I wasn't super confident on fashion. I wasn't sure I was able to disrupt the industry in any way. It was already very cluttered. So when I started exploring different departments, in my course called Global Design, the work that felt most instinctive and the assignments that I was most proud of were fashion and were from fashion. And so a lot of encouragement from the teachers as well. And I went on to enroll at Parsons, pursued the design course there, sewing and garment construction. Again, there also, I think I did graphic design and letterpress and sewing, and my work in the garment construction course was really appreciated. And so I remember telling myself, I'll give myself a year. If I'm able to pull up something meaningful from this journey in a year, I'll keep at it, or I'll move on. And so I came back in 2017. I came back 2018. I set up, and I wanted to do it my way. I said I will be in couture because it's slower, it's intentional, it's more meaningful. But how do I disrupt it? So the first thing that I decided was sustainability wasn't a big buzzword then. We wanted to be introducing it to luxury. So we came up with upcycled luxury, and applique became our story. We wanted to build a brand naively enough, on zero waste thinking. And of course, that's a different story how it panned out, but that's how our applique lehenga started. Our fun, vibrant, 13, 14 colors in a lehenga, that came from all the tailoring waste that we used to accumulate and applique onto those motifs. And that signature, I think, really spoke to a lot of people. And year one, and there was no looking back. I think it was very well received.
I'm actually going to come back to waste and using applique and textile waste in some time.
Absolutely.
But I want to move to Archana till then.
Your journey, very different, and even your design language is soft, poetic, simple. You also went and won the Vogue Fashion Fund so early in your career. What was it like for a young Hyderabadi designer who, made it so big early in their career, and how is it shaping a brand that's built on heritage craftsmanship?
So I think, I'm not that person anymore now, but back then as a young designer who started I actually have an experience with being a menswear designer. So that was where I started off from, okay? So I come from a school of thought where minimalism was what drove the brand. And I got into fashion thinking I'll just make pretty clothes, I'll just be a brand, but I didn't think of fashion as a business. So when Vogue Fashion Fund happened, it sort of validated that this brand could have a business. It did have potential. So it kind of validated what I was doing. I don't need validation today because I'm more confident, but as a young designer, I needed that. And Vogue gave me that kind of mentorship or that kind of a push into doing what I wanted to do. And
It also teach you the business of fashion, because I feel I spoke to so many designers, and one of the key problems that actually comes out is that creativity is excellent, and then they run out of the funds, and they don't know how to continue the business.
Yeah, that's something I learned with time. I feel like Vogue actually gave me that step forward. But then with time, because I'm just a designer, I don't come from a business school. I don't have the business, I mean, I didn't have it back then. And with time, with my explorations, I've sort of understood what's working and without compromising on my vision. And I think today we've realized a brand that has business without selling themselves short. Like I like working on what I believe in, and it's working out so far. Yeah.
Nice. Aisha, you spoke about, your designs having a lot of applique work, a lot of crafts, and using a lot of textile waste. For a couture piece, and I'm going to divide this into two questions. Is it easy to sell to a consumer saying, I'm using textile waste? And what is it for both of you inside your ateliers, which I want to understand in terms of using craft?
Should I go
Yeah,
first?
please.
So good you brought it up. It's a continuation to my previous answer. When I said I was naive enough to believe that I could build a zero waste brand. So when you start small, you can embrace sustainability in its truest form. But what happens when the business grows? We started hitting volumes, and of course, the bride wants the exact lehenga that she's seen. I can't source that waste. You know, that waste is no longer available with me. I don't have the exact Rani pink that you want. I can't go buy waste, right? It's counterproductive to what I'm saying and preaching. And so we got thinking, like, while on the one hand we're saying that we are into sustainability and zero waste, but on the other hand we want a sustainable business. We want our consumers happy, and these are brides. This is their one big day, and so then that set the ball rolling for how do we expand without compromising on the initial tenets that the brand was built on. We'd introduced prints, we'd introduced Lurexes, in our
Like
own
the
way.
one you're wearing.
Yes, so
Which is upcycled.
correct. So I mean, in different ways, in our own way, the lehengas looked very similar. Nobody could tell the difference, but of course, then we priced them differently. We said this is a print, this is an applique, and I think the part that you'd asked about whether you'd like to sell it as an upcycled good, I think when we started, we had Tesla as an example. We wanted it to be a universally appealing design, irrespective of sustainability. The carbon footprint was one aspect, but it was just beautiful design. The car was aspirational enough to buy without having to think about the sustainability aspect. So that was our selling point here as well. We wanted to create beautiful, vibrant lehengas, which people instantly connected to, without having to even tell the story that this is sustainable. That was the work that we were doing at the back. So I think even today, if you see the most popular lehenga that we have from the India Couture Week collection, it's made out of, the back end, I don't even know if I should say it, it's like kachra lehenga, because we make it literally from all the cart, whatever comes out, we repurpose that, and we've loaded that lehenga with so much, it looks stunning. It's called Dreamlight, but actually the story is that it's leaving very little carbon footprint for at least the waste that we generate apart from fabric is the embellishment, right? And that's going all on that lehenga. And that lehenga we're seeing in volumes. And that's amazing because it makes me happy because all of that repurposed material is an everyday thing. I don't have to source that. That's coming from my cart.
And it exists in your
Correct.
factory.
And on a daily basis. So I don't have to source that waste. And the fact that people are embracing it for the beauty of the design, we're hitting two birds with a stone, right?
True. And, I remember a few years ago at Conscious Effort itself, we had got the director of Econil, if you know the Econil textile, which
Yeah.
is actually a textile that a lot of international brands use. And he said something very similar to what you just said. And he said, brands that truly care about sustainability are doing it quietly because that's in the core fabric of the brand. And Archana, your designs are so modern. Not upcycled, but modern, using a lot of Indian craft. How do you integrate both modernity in your aesthetic and also keeping craft so relevant when you're designing?
I think craft to me is basically how I reinterpret it into our embroideries, because for me embroideries is a big part of our brand. And you know, when I look at our heritage textiles, I was very inspired by the weaves more than our traditional embroideries. So we try to reinterpret traditional weaves in terms of embroidery. So we try to recreate, like, okay, cross stitch is an embroidery, but we try to make it look like it's part of the fabric, as in it's part of the weave of the fabric. But we used embroideries to do that. I think it's just the way of your personal storytelling, because you know, something like our very famous embroidery is our pressed flower technique, which actually we also use like wasted fabric to create those pressed flowers, and it is also an applique, but both of our aesthetics are so completely different. They're very delicate. So I feel like just the way we reinterpret a traditional embroidery makes it more modern. Yeah.
India today is also discovering a cultural shift, I feel. After Dior has spotlighted our embroideries, I feel, you know, Prada's also come up with the Kolhapuri chappal this year, and in fact, that was plagiarism in many ways. And until and unless, you know, consumers actually pointed it out, nobody really, you know, pointed it out and asked them to take accountability for what they did. So do you feel we are really at a place where globally people are looking at Indian craft and saying, this is the global hub for luxury, and we need to protect our own and respect our own crafts a lot more?
Okay, so I would agree on the fact that there is global spotlight, but I think what we need to understand is this industry has survived not because of any validation from the West, right? We've always had our patronage here, locally. True. Like it or not, weddings have been the true patrons of this craft surviving for this long. Because it's not like the designers who were 35 years in the industry who've made it successfully today have been inspired by Dior's Chanakya story or not. They've done it nonetheless. And they've been able to survive because in our social fabric, weddings and any occasions that, you know, we see are really an important showcase of whether it's our looms, our weaves, our embroideries. This is what, whether you're royalty or you're an ultra HNI or you are an aspiring middle class, you're from the aspiring middle class, you will spend on that day. That you will save for your entire, whatever, you know, your everyday savings go into your daughter's wedding or your son's wedding, and that is where they've truly found patronage. So as much as I'd like to say, oh, I can't really do couture without making a lehenga choli, but that lehenga choli sustains us, right? And this validation has come today, after many years. But I think the designers who've already made it successfully for the last 30 years have done it because of the local support that we've gotten.
So you feel our industry, India in itself is a space where they already have a market and have their growth. We don't need to look at for validation from the West.
It's added another layer.
Yeah.
But it's not a defining moment.
Right.
I don't think it is. I mean, the fact that they've knocked on the doors of Chanakya 20 years ago is we've had the potential, right? We've always had these industries. Just as a building economy, we didn't prioritize them. We didn't market them well enough. But our weddings saved us. And so, you know, when I hear people complaining about weddings, I said, you know, it is an economy that's building itself up. So we're not there yet, but we are getting there. And so far, so good. Like,
and with most billionaire weddings in India now, I think it's just growing.
as long as they're supporting, you know, that perception gap where if Valentino makes a sari, they will go and buy the Valentino. I think that, I feel, needs to stop. I think you need to start respecting the people innovating here, opening up your pockets to the people making these goods here, because don't call us exploitative. You know, it's when you see a big price tag on an Indian garment, think of it as not a vanity project of that one outfit. Think of it like you're really supporting local innovators here in this country and who truly are making that change. Hyderabad opens its pockets. And so I think we're paying our artisans much better here. Maybe UP doesn't. Maybe Lucknow, and I don't know. I probably, when people complain about artisans getting paid lesser, you have to be able to buy couture for the price that we're
I was going to come
offering
to
at.
that as my next question. I was just going to ask you that when Prada makes the Kolhapuri, they sell it for $1,000. When we go to buy it, it's probably 250 rupees, and our artisans, our karigars don't even make 100 rupees on this. So while our industry is evolving, and there are designers like you who are consciously using craft and in your design language and working with craft clusters or craftspeople, where do the artisans really fit in this dialogue of growth?
So that's the thing. I feel like one thing is that with the artisans or the karigars that we work with, even today, there's a sense of hierarchy. There's a sense of, as designers, we sort of dictate what they need to experiment or provide to us, right? I feel like if we start treating the artisans as a collaborator or as an equal, as somebody who can come up with their own ideas or give us something that we can explore further, I feel like that would really change things as well. And another thing I wanted to add with what you were saying was, with all these international brands that are using hand-embroidered techniques from Made in India, right? I feel like, yes, there is a tag that probably says where the garment is entirely put together, saying Made in India or Made in Bangladesh or whatever. But I feel like, because right now I'm also doing movies, and with movies I see credits rolling after a film, right? Where every technician is given a credit for what they're doing. I feel like every garment has a story as well, because I would like to know the story behind every garment, as in where the fabric is sourced from, where it is embroidered. I would love to know the entire story behind it, and I think that's something the West can start doing more often.
I think LV has started a blockchain system today where you can actually scan their barcode, and they're building that technology right now where they know where each piece, which hand has it passed to the
that's
last
amazing.
person. So you know where the leather was sourced, where was it sewn, who was it sewn by, and then further, the number of buyers for it, because they're also, into the resale space for authenticity. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I also want to touch a little bit upon costume designing, because as skills in craft, I think it would be completely different to be designing as a fashion designer for the end consumer, or as a costume designer as opposed to that. How do you see the pressures and the possibilities within your atelier when you're designing for both, especially when you're thinking of sustainability as a designer?
So actually in film, there is no such thing as sustainability, because we make so many explorations, we make so many variations of a single garment, and then one gets selected.
Where does the waste go?
The waste, there is no structure in films. That is something that we definitely want to rework. But because I come from fashion, and I come from a traditional school of fashion, and my techniques and my thinking is a little more traditional in terms of making clothing. So I have started reusing and revamping pieces that we've made as trials or test fits for the hero, and we rework those and we use it for the extras later. Extras as in not the main lead, but the ones behind him. But we repurpose a lot of the pieces that we make for the main lead, and then we use that to create pieces for the others. And we're trying to do, it's not entirely zero wastage, but we're trying to do the best we can right now.
Fair. Also, corporate intervention. I know costume designing doesn't have that, but definitely fashion brands today. I think in the history of Indian business, the last 10, 15 years is the first time that we've seen so many large corporates taking interest in fashion as a real business, as a profitable business, where growth is seen and achieved. How do you both see the landscape of this currently, especially in the couture space, where everything is made to order? How do you see scalability and sustainability coming in together with investments as a brand? Is it even possible to scale slowly?
It is. really is an example, because if Christian Dior did it, so many years ago, I'm sure Indian design houses are now following suit, because that is the only way scale can come in, by organizing yourselves. I think the biggest disadvantage that we've had was we didn't have enough training. Like she said, everyone who feels creative enters the space with zero business acumen. You sometimes have a partner, sometimes don't. Sometimes your mother's running the finance, your husband's running the production. And, these are family, like mom and pop shops. So I obviously didn't have a partner to begin with. And my husband has his own business. And so I had to really think, how can I organize? Because I was coming from law school. I didn't think of myself as extremely creative. I wanted to be in it, and I had this desire to be in fashion. But I had to organize myself, because I knew I wouldn't survive if I didn't. So when it came to paying daily wages in cash, I had to stop that. I said, we will introduce PF, we will introduce ESI, we will introduce all the norms. I had to go by the book, because the one thing is, of course, I didn't have a partner in the business, but I could watch and learn what others were doing with different businesses. And so I realized that there was so much that we could do, which the industry wasn't doing. And whether it came to paying in the account. A lot of my karigars didn't have accounts. So we invited a bank to come open up accounts for them. And then they did that. And then the whole PF thing, the ESI thing. And of course, introducing a software, tracking your goods. We started doing all of that now. I think I also entered at a time where people were expanding, and they had the resources too, those that really made it to the top. And of course, corporates had entered the scene, and I think RBI, Reliance and ABFRL had really played a part in introducing audits, and it really trickled top down. And we didn't have a corporate intervening yet, but we had precedents to what people were doing. So, for example, the hub is in a residential area, right? People still continue to run businesses out of there. The pioneering thing for us to do was to move it to an industrial area. In Delhi, people had done that with Gurgaon and Noida.
Yes.
We didn't. We were still relying on a very residential area to run our machines, to dye.
Yeah.
So it took me, the last 7 years, what I really value is the help I've gotten in just organizing our business. It's taken me some time to really bring change to the bottom of the pyramid. But we've been able to move to that industrial location, trying to, when permissions, of course, PCB, it's a difficult process, but we're trying. Every day we are trying to make this as by the book as possible, just to be able to proudly say that we are, of course, in a craft business, but we are as, of course, not to keep saying exploitative, but like, we're trying to do the fair thing, the right thing for the people that are truly supporting us at the bottom, to try and do meaningful things for them and their families. If, for example, the ESI thing, when somebody, their loved one falls sick, they're able to utilize and go to the ESI hospital in Hyderabad and, get free medical advice. And that is something that makes me proud. I don't want to give out advances to them. Instead, I will support you in a dignified way and by the book. This is something that the government has provided. We will do it. We will take it up. So that's the thing that I feel corporate intervention has done, indirectly or directly, and it's a good thing. The second part of your question, as to how you can do it and is it possible, apart from the back end, I think even with your stores, with your expansion story, founders can be really burnt out because it's a creatively draining process, right? So I think over time, the only way to do this is to create, and of course the West has done it, to create those systems and expand in areas, we're not talking about putting a store in the airports of the country or you know, in a massy way. Even for couture, there's a way to do it.
Great.
Expand in markets that truly value your identity as a brand. So, in my example, we opened our third store in Delhi last year. In Delhi, people really are surprised that Hyderabad's your hometown,
Yeah.
and you know Bombay is so big.
Yeah.
Why Delhi? Why the third store? We've done it because we felt that people valued what we made
Correct.
in Delhi, and it was a sustainable way to grow.
Right.
Of course, we could have gone to Punjab, we could have gone to Gujarat, we could have gone to
Right.
Ahmedabad, but we chose to go deeper into a market that truly valued our craft. And I think that's what being organized is. You're looking at your numbers every day. You're looking at where you're getting, a validation in terms of just business, not just like creatively people coming in looking and saying amazing stuff, but truly where people are you're able to find the patronage. So I felt like, I think that also, that corporatization helped. The fact
That's
that you're able to look at
interesting.
an MIS, a P&L, and
Correct.
see.
And I think when you even go through the entire fundraise journey, you realize there are so many ways you can actually streamline your business. And what I hear from you, and if I may just articulate this in a line, is what you're trying to say is corporate intervention helps you be at par with any global leading business, giving your workers dignity that they deserve, and teaches you the discipline of strategy and research before entering markets to make it scalable.
Correct.
Yes. Archana, your thoughts?
So all of the changes that you made in your business, that's something that we plan to do. But the way I look at business is we're still a small business in my head. I feel like we make smaller collections. We make pieces on custom only. We take orders only on custom. So scalability for me is still in a very limited stage right now, because I like making pieces that have all the details that I have in my mind. We execute it, and based on that, we take orders right now. And with staff, I love everything that you're doing right now, and I hope I bring that in soon.
I've also always believed that the change is not only going to come only from the back end. I think it is the consumer also who has to demand it. Till the consumer is not sitting here and saying that I want this, no matter how much intention you may have in creation and creating better, more sustainably, more consciously, using any craft whatsoever, I think the consumer is the end person who really has the power. How have you seen the Indian consumer shifting their perspective towards craft-oriented products?
I think customers these days are more aware of what they want, and they're more like, they want to know where the piece is made. They don't want trends anymore. They want a piece that is handcrafted, something that has a story to tell, something that's personal to them. They're not just going out shopping because it's in fashion or whatever. And most of the people who come to us also come to us because they want something custom. They want to, like there's a bride that's come to us who wanted to repurpose a sari of her mom's in a more modern silhouette. And these are the kind of pieces and orders that I love to take up. And people are having fun with fashion, and they don't want pieces that are big and large and making a statement anymore. They want things that they can wear and repurpose and reuse and personalize. So I feel like that's where it's headed.
Yeah, I also have another aspect to this. I feel like we are getting somewhere, but we have a long way to go. If you see the willingness to buy a leather good from India versus a leather good from Europe, it's very apparent, right? Like if the bag costs the same as a Jacquemus, you'd buy a Jacquemus instead of an Indian. So that perception gap is still there. They are, of course, wanting to know a little bit more, connect to the brand, not just wear a pretty outfit. But there I feel we still have to have that revolution to really, like I said, believe in the India story, that when you are buying a good from India, you are truly encouraging local innovation. You are letting a young Indian believe that I can be in a creative space and not be bankrupt as a
Do you think this is
businesswoman.
changing with the Gen Z in your ateliers who are shopping? Because they shop very differently. And when we look at data, there's enough data to also prove that they're just more value-led in their way and of looking at life and shopping, or any aspect of life, in fact.
Probably, but
Are you seeing that translate?
Yeah, we're selling bridal. right? The choices are still made by the elders of the family. So as much as the Gen Z would love to come and say, I love the lehenga, but in the end, you need validation from your mom and your mom-in-law and 5 other people who are saying you should be wearing a pink, not a turquoise, and things like that. So there is change, and I've seen this shift because, you know, earlier when in my little 7-year span of, the first 2 years were about, can you add sleeves? Can you make the neckline 7?
Yeah.
Today, I don't get such requests. People will be like, they're okay to wear a corset. They're okay to wear a sleeveless to their
That's
wedding.
true. I see
They're
that.
okay to wear
Really?
an 8 and a
I see
half,
that.
9. So that shift has happened. And they want it to be light. They want it to be functional. But I feel we still have a long way to go in terms of, like I told you, the points that I'd made earlier in those departments.
Before I move, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think with Pret it's a little different. I think with Pret clothing, people still come and they make their own decisions, and it's easier for them to lead with purpose, you know.
And you've seen that shift with the younger lot.
I did.
Today?
Yeah, for sure. They know what they want, and with Pret, I feel like they can just go ahead and buy what they want.
Also,
you know?
it's an easier choice to
It's
make.
an easier
I
choice
think,
to make.
with-
Also, the price points are much different,
Yeah.
so I feel like
Yeah.
they're stronger and more confident
Yeah.
making that choice.
Yeah. Before I move to the audience questions, I want to do a last question and understand, where do you see the next decade for Indian fashion?
Indian fashion. Go first. Let me think.
I would like to see Indian fashion respected, chosen first, before, like I said, if Valentino made a sari, and soon enough it will, given it's making, Prada's making Kolhapuri chappals, and you've seen Alia Bhatt wear it on the ramp, I want them to choose a sari that's been made by an Indian designer over that. You know, that day I will truly believe that India's decade in creative crafts has come alive, because that right now they don't have a choice there. So they're making the choices here. But the day when fashion becomes global and people are making saris everywhere, we don't know what happens. And I want to see a decade where we are at par with a fashion house elsewhere. And I give tremendous credit to Sabyasachi. I think he wants to be a super brand, and what he's doing. Yeah, so people, irrespective of whether it's, a Harry or a Cartier, they would, I think, buy a Sabya
Or
elsewhere.
Lolita Dobre today, they've taken
And
it
consistently at it. And I think it really inspires a younger person in the same industry to be able to emulate that as an example. And I think that's what I'd like to see. More super brands from India, more, less craft talk and more, okay.
Real talk.
Yeah, irrespective of where you come from, you're able to hold that attention. I think that I would truly aspire for the next decade.
I like chosen first. And a few years ago we run an online store now, but we used to run an offline store as well. And I used to stock a brand called Pero.
I love that.
Yes. And I remember a customer walked into the store, there are 2 of them, and one of them asked for the price, and they are exorbitantly priced, must remember 50 or 60,000 for a cotton embroidered piece. And the other lady standing there says, yes, I was just traveling somewhere in Europe and I saw this there, which in her mind was a validation that I can spend more than 50,000 rupees on a cotton piece because I've seen it on a rack abroad. Wow. And I think chosen first is going to be something very, very important for India, because the same people are comfortable spending the same amount for a piece crafted in a similar way in an atelier abroad, and they just don't have the same kind of respect to spend the same amount of penny for the same product in India. Archana, your closing thoughts.
I think I would like to see Indian craft more acknowledged all over the world. I'd like people to know by name what the techniques are. I'd like people to know what the weave is. I'd like people to know the weave and the embroidery by the technical terms, not just beadwork. You know, a little bit more acknowledgement, a little bit more recognition, and more accessibility to Indian
Not just
fashion.
Zardozi.
Not just Zardozi. Yeah, like I want them to know the technical terms.
That'll be a long list because we are probably one of the only countries in
start
the world
somewhere.
that has the highest number of crafts found in one region. I don't think there's any other country in the world that produces this much. I'm going to open this up to the audience.
On your earlier point about Dior and plagiarism, how aspirational is a Sabya or a Manish Malhotra's 8 lakh lehengas? And what are your thoughts on, like, what are those called? The copies that are made in the bylanes of Delhi that all brides.
I think they're terrible, but I need the designers to say this.
Well, in his own words, Sabyasachi says it's the highest form of flattery. So as much as it hurts the business, what you truly come away with in this is people love it. Of course, not everybody can pay the 8 lakh. And of course, there is a justification to why it also is an 8 lakh, which people probably don't understand. Like I said, it's a seasonal business. You have to sustain the same karigars on your rolls for the off-season. You have to pay the same wages. So, you know, there are so many factors. Your rents, your high street rents are so high and things like that. But yes, I mean, there are always people that want to wear it. They can't afford it. It happens. And I think that as much as I would like to send a copyright infringement, which I think Rahul Mishra has done, but it is a way of life. You have to learn to live with it, at least here in India.
Does it hurt the business? Because nowhere else have I seen.
I think it hurts smaller businesses. I feel like the bigger fish doesn't really affect them, but the smaller businesses, when they're really counting on some kind of acknowledgement for their work, or they want something to take back, and I think it hurts them.
I have a different perspective here. I feel if it is inspiration, and to what level of inspiration it is okay. But if we are going to use call out Prada for plagiarism, I think we have to use the same yardstick for everybody else. We would be hypocrites if we don't use the same yardstick.
The bigger fish also, if you see, because they're recognized as Sabyasachi, right? Like if you're able to tell that it's a copy of a certain designer. For the smaller ones, they haven't found that validation yet. So as much as it hurts every business, the fact that this is a rip-off makes it different. Yeah. As opposed to, for a smaller one that's just about making, in our case, there's a sequin thing that we do. Our Park Buel sari, which we say from Barcelona, which we had shot, inspired by Gaudi. There are so many Surat rip-offs for that. It every day hurts our business. We're somewhere in the middle, right? But I think where it hurts is when people didn't even know it was from the brand. But those that knew. But there are always people who, they're like, I bought it, but I didn't even know it was yours. Yeah. So that's when it feels like, oh, double whammy, At least if you're buying it with the knowledge that, hey, it's a rip-off, I can't. But this one's like, oh, I just love the design, but I didn't know it was yours. I've seen it at reports day at my kid's school. Another mom is wearing that print, but she's bought it from, I don't even want to name them right now.
But we can call it complimentary marketing. We need more customers also who want to spend and not get their own sarees copied. I had a customer in Delhi who, and somebody extremely wealthy, and she called me one day and she says, मेरी सब्यासाची और अबू जानी की 2 साड़ी हैं, कोई जानते हो थोड़ा कॉपी कर देंगे एक और कलर में. And this is so common. It is so common that you will go spend on that, but you don't want to spend on the second or third or fourth or fifth piece, and you just want to have that copied in another color, copied for something else. We
have a new problem where we can't hold a consumer accountable for where the product finally goes. So if it's a bridal outfit, and if the consumer, if the wearer has worn it for her wedding and doesn't want to keep it, sell it to those rent, those platforms that give it out on rent. Yes. We're, as designers, we're not able to control that. Yeah. So we suddenly find it on a renting platform, and people are renting it out And this is a new problem that we've
I
encountered
didn't even
2 years
think
ago.
of that.
No, it used to happen with bags
See,
everywhere.
bags are okay.
But now with
But the hard work
lehengas-
they have put in creating a lehenga for maybe 6 months or a few months that it takes to make that lehenga, and then instead of coming to Aisha or Archana and buying it, they're renting it for less than half the price.
they can rent it out because it's already on the platform.
Yeah.
But they're not getting these pieces from you directly. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, so
No.
we're saying that a consumer has bought it from us. We're not able to enter a contract with the consumer that you have to keep it in your
yeah.
wardrobe, right? We are not able to control the end user of that product. So she can sell it to a renting platform.
Right.
And others are renting it out. So but it obviously dilutes the
Of
brand.
course.
But how many contracts can you enter into with every consumer that
And
you
for
can't?
God's sake, if we
can't
sue a
control that.
customer, my God.
I was asked to give me, like, a friend of mine was opening one of the very
Yeah,
popular
yeah.
rental portals.
Right.
So she came up to me and she says, will you give me some of the clothes? I've seen you wearing, you're on Insta, you're not going to wear them again. And I'm like, hell no, I'm not parting with my clothes. Even if they're sitting gathering dust, I'm not going to give them
Yeah.
to you. And, but I had many of my other friends, associates who did give them up.
Yeah.
Now what happens is there's two things. Yes, it hurts you as a designer that someone is wearing an Aisha Rao or an Archana Rao without having personally bought it from you.
Yeah.
But there's the flip side of it which says that XYZ is wearing it, posting it on Instagram. It is not a copy. It is still an Aisha.
Yeah.
It's still an Archana. So you are getting eyeballs for something that may not have been bought from you,
Yeah.
but you are getting recognition for it.
Well, it's
That's the
sustain-
only
yeah.
downside of that.
Correct.
She said it's a double whammy. So
It's
yeah.
sustainable. It's pre-loved.
It is
It's a
pre-loved,
concept
yeah,
that we are trying
of
to
course.
embrace right now. It's
Absolutely.
just that,
Very new concept which is really picked up
Yeah.
surprisingly.
yeah.
Is this a problem only in India? Like
No,
where you
see, your bags are always, I mean, pre-loved bags. If you go to New York, there's actual chains that, you know, what goes around comes around. You can,
Yeah.
or, you know, you can go to those stores, get a Birkin as well. I mean, the
Absolutely.
people are not giving you a Birkin
Yeah.
even if you want to buy it, but in this renting platform, you can
You're
get a
definitely
Birkin
gonna
as well.
find it.
So it exists. It's just that with a couture piece, it probably hurts a bit more because there's so much
Correct.
hand embroidery, and the fact that if it's a bag made in China,
Right.
which is a machine cut
Right.
bag on an AutoCAD
Right.
software, I get it. You know, of course,
Yeah.
LV is losing out on some business, but
Yeah.
but here, when you are really trying
Yeah.
to sustain all these artisans,
Right.
and somebody's able to rent that lehenga out, I think it hurts a bit more. But
Definitely.
as-
Our craft is so different and time consuming that I think what you're trying to say is that the bag could have taken maybe 48 hours to make, but a lehenga is not going to take 48 hours to hand embroider. So I hear you on that. Archana, you had some thoughts on this?
I mean, we don't have any control over pre-love
Yeah.
anymore, right? I feel like, in a way, it's sort of like you said, if a Sabyasachi lehenga is being replicated and you look at it as imitation is the best form of flattery, I feel like somebody buying your out or renting your outfit is also similar. I
Yeah.
feel like you're giving access
Yeah.
to somebody who can't afford these
Correct.
really expensive lehenga. I
Yeah.
feel like that's a little bit better than someone copying the lehenga. in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like they're at least paying
Definitely.
rent.